Hello and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. After repeated denials, the Saudis are now expected to change their story on the fate of Jamal Khashoggi. Was he the victim of abduction and torture that went too far? Donald Trump has expressed concern, but little more. Some are saying Riyadh could get away with murder. Cross-talking a Saudi crisis, I'm joined by my guest, Sharmeen Narwani in Beirut. She is a journalist as well as a Middle East geopolitical expert. In Tehran, we have Mohammed Miranda. He's a professor at the University of Tehran. And in Washington, we have Ali Al-Ahmed. He is a founder and director of the Institute of Gulf Affairs. All right, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I always appreciate it. Mohammed, let me go to you first in Tehran with a hypothetical. Let's say there's a hypothetical dissident against the Iranian government living abroad and goes to an Iranian consulate and never comes out. What kind of news story would that be, and what would the reaction be? Because living in Russia, I can tell you, Russia gets accused of things and sanctions are done before we could even finish a program here. So what would your reaction to my hypothetical situation be? Go ahead, Mohammed.
Well, it's obvious. We would be probably discussing the UN Security Council meeting that would be taking place to condemn Iran or perhaps almost any other country in the world. But when it comes to Saudi Arabia, the double standards are extraordinary. In fact, what I think is even the biggest question, in fact, is that the Saudis have been killing hundreds of thousands of people in Yemen through starvation and disease, and tens of thousands of people through warfare. They've bombed weddings, they've bombed schools, they've bombed funerals, they've bombed hospitals, they've bombed buses. Just again, I think yesterday or a while back, they bombed another bus, and there's I think 17 people were killed, and there's no real reaction. So when poor Jamal is killed, suddenly there's this outrage, which there are reasons behind this. But when all these other people are killed, yeah, I think that the issue with Jamal is that Mohammed bin Salman didn't recognize that Jamal was too well connected. He knew too many people. He was friends with too many people, thanks to the Saudis. For many years, the Saudis had funded him. He knew everyone. He'd invite people to Saudi Arabia. People felt they couldn't be quiet after he went missing, because they would look like fools. And then I think in addition to that, the divisions in the United States made it even worse for Mohammed bin Salman, because many people are attacking Trump, and they're using Mohammed bin Salman in order to attack Trump. So I think if there was a different president, we wouldn't have this situation.
You know, Sharmeen, I mean, it's a really obvious thing to address here. I mean, Mike Pompeo, as I understand, is now in Riyadh. Now, the Crown Prince is the nominal leader of the country, or I should say the family, the royal family. If he was involved and had knowledge of this, then he was involved in a murder. If he didn't know, well, then it's just as bad. So he has rogue elements in his security forces. I mean, I don't see any real explanation for this whatsoever. We need to know, and then the Turks chime in here. They say they have all the forensic evidence. We remain waiting to see that there. But I mean, I don't see any logical way out of explaining the fate of this man here. But I'm sure Mike Pompeo, because it's all about oil and power, there's going to be some kind of resolution. And I think all of us will say hypocrisy. Go ahead, Sharmeen in Beirut.
Well, it's true, you know, when the first report started to come out, and I was astonished that the Western mainstream media jumped on the story and took it where they did,
well,
because of the Washington, they didn't care about Yemen.
No, but it was because of the Washington Post. I think that was the reason why. Keep going. Go ahead.
Yeah, so, you know, one just assumed that Jamal was killed and, you know, dismembered. That's the news that was coming out. But then very quickly you saw that what was coming out from unknown or unnamed Turkish sources was not being reflected in what official Turkish officials and Erdogan were saying on the record. So immediately you could see there was a leverage game being played out here. You started to see, hang on, wait a second, maybe there's a larger picture here. Maybe Turkey and Qatar are going to sort of squeeze the Saudi stone as much as they can to get some concessions or cash out of the Saudis. But, you know, where there's concessions and cash to be made, Trump is never going to be far from that negotiation. And so, of course, now Pompeo is taking the lead to try to, you know, to frame what happened. But I don't think he's going to be successful. I think there's just been too many stories, and the feeling has turned. You know?
I agree with you. That's why I love that they're going to try to frame it in a certain way. And I ended my question to you with the word hypocrisy. Ali, let me go to you in Washington. I mean, it seems to me that when we heard that there was a joint Turkish-Saudi investigation, the first thing that went to my mind was, no, this is not an investigation. This is a negotiation. Exactly what Sharmeen had to say, how they're going to resolve it. And I'm sure Erdogan and Qatar, they have a huge smile across their face. I mean, they are getting concessions. It'd be very interesting what they are. Go ahead, Ali.
Yes, I agree with Sharmeen's assessment. That's my assessment as well, that there is, you know, there was talk of releasing the audio, that shows the exact murder and who was involved and the details and everything. But it was withheld to negotiate a settlement, and the settlement will be, it's a transnational settlement. The U.S., like Sharmeen said, Pompeo is not in Riyadh to ask about Jamal Khashoggi. He's in Riyadh to say how much are we getting, what's our cut. And the Qataris, I think, are part of this as well, because we have reports that Adel Jubair was in Doha just last night and to make some arrangements. And the Turks are actually getting a lot of investments from the Saudis. They need it at this time. So yes, there is a settlement being made to give Saudi Arabia out. And
was in the consulate, they could have abducted him. I assume they probably could have got him out of the country. Why, if he is dead, why would they want to kill him? Go ahead.
You know, that's a very good question, and I think under normal circumstances and for normal people, it would make sense, the question. That would be the first thing that comes to mind. How foolish could they be in committing such a crime in such a way? But we all have to remember that this is the same person who last year had this Davos in the desert, in the Ritz, and then a week later, after all these investors left, they turned it into a prison for billionaires and princes to drive away any hope for any investment. Then we had, of course, the Yemeni war, which he's lost and he won't let go. And I think with what's happened, it's going to empower the Yemenis, by the way. I think this is going to make the situation in Yemen much worse for the Saudis, because they're going to have a stronger hand at the negotiating table when this all finally ends. But then we also had the kidnapping of the Lebanese prime minister. That doesn't make sense. None of these things make sense. And then we had, of course, Qatar as well, and the stupidity of the Saudis with the Canadians. None of this makes sense. And I think probably the best explanation that I can think of, at least, is that Mohammed bin Salman is this billionaire, son of a billionaire. He's spoiled. He's sort of like Uday, the eldest son of Saddam Hussein, out of control. And I think no one really around him dares to tell him that his ideas are foolish. They're all yes men. They want to keep their status, and they don't want to have a fate like that of Jamal's. So, you know, it doesn't make sense what they do, but this is Mohammed bin Salman, and this is what we've seen over the past year and a half. A lot of what he does doesn't make sense.
Okay, let me go to Sharmeen before we go to the break here. I wouldn't put it beyond doubt that there will be some kind of purge in the Saudi security forces, because, of course, that's how it wasn't, quote unquote, my fault, it was their fault. Do you see something like that happening, a purge? Go ahead, Sharmeen, in Beirut.
Actually, he's better than his cousin, who is an ISIS backer.
Yeah, well, let me go to Mohammed. I mean, again, you know, this neo-colonial attitude. Maybe we should bring back his brother. Wow, have they learned anything about forced regime change around the world here? Well, Mohammed, one of the things I found fascinating and really quite saddening, if not disgusting, is that the American media angle about it is weapons and jobs. I mean, Jamal's fate is almost an epiphenomenon to all of this here. And seeing, to be honest with our viewers here, all of these arms deals, they're memorandums of understanding. It's just, we're thinking about buying this, we're thinking about selling you this. Anyway, it's not as far along as everybody thinks. And I'm really kind of stunned by Donald Trump's reaction to it all, because he's walking into a trap set by his enemies here. We'll see. Go ahead, Mohammed.
Well, Trump is he's no different from previous presidents. He has no, I don't think there's no issue of morality for him. But previous presidents were a bit more hypocritical. The Americans, I mean, Brennan, for example, the former CIA director, has been speaking about how awful Mohammed bin Salman is, but things were all right when they were funding ISIS. Things were all right when Turkey and Saudi Arabia were cooperating together in funding ISIS, helping Al-Qaeda. It was fine when they were massacring people in Yemen during the previous U.S. administration under Obama. This is just sheer hypocrisy. And one of the most hypocritical things is how, for example, just I think the other day in The Atlantic, someone wrote that the United States is no longer supporting what's right. The United States never was supporting what's right. They are the problem in this region. I mean, if it wasn't for the United States, the Saudis wouldn't have been enabled to do all this horrible stuff. It sort of reminds me of what happened when Iraq invaded Kuwait. Before Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, there was nothing. The Americans said nothing about chemical weapons. And I remember as soon as he went into Kuwait, George Bush, the father, went on TV and said, this monster, he gassed his own people and he gassed Iranians. Whereas George Bush knew quite well that his own government, that he was one of the people involved in giving and enabling Saddam Hussein to acquire chemical weapons and to use those chemical weapons against Iranians and against his own people. So, this is sheer hypocrisy. Some again, pundits, they say, they sort of try to say, Mohammed bin Salman is like Putin or he's like Iran. No, there's no moral equivalence. Saudi Arabia has created great evil in this region. They've created ISIS. They've destroyed Syria. And Western countries are equally guilty of all this. And the reason why the United States or the U.S. government and Trump is supporting Mohammed bin Salman right now even is because of Israel. The Israelis want him to remain in power because of the so-called deal of the century. And it's because of Syria, and it's because of Iran. So the United States they say we have shared interests now, but not shared values. Well, no, the United States has shared values with Saudi Arabia. We saw it in Yemen, we saw it in Syria, we saw it in Libya, we saw it in Iraq, and we saw it in Afghanistan. And now we see it with poor Jamal. If you recall, last year on this show, Jamal was really trying to defend Saudi Arabia.
Yes, he was.
This person, less than a year ago on your show, was trying to defend Saudi Arabia, and I told him that you can't even go back to your own country.
Yep, I remember, and that's why I have you and Charmine on the program, because Charmine was also with us here. Charmine, let me go back to you.
And I want to chime in here.
Go ahead.
I want to just chime in.
Go ahead.
That Jamal was to the end of his life was a defender of the monarchy. He just criticized Mohammed bin Salman, and he thought of my work and other dissidents' work as garbage, and he even said bad things about us. So he was a defender. The only reason that they killed him because he was for decades was their defender, and when he started turning against them, they said we don't want any defections, so we need to make an example of this guy who thinks he can in defect, and only absolute loyalty is acceptable to us. That's why this happened in this horrific way.
Sharmeen, that's I've come across this, what we just heard from Ali here. I mean, one of the first things I came across when people analyzing it, I mean, not in the lamestream, stupid Western media, but I mean actual analysts of the region, is that one reason for all of this is exactly for what Ali had to say, is that Jamal was an example, a very horrific example. If indeed he is dead, we cannot say that on this program because we don't have the evidence yet. I have to be very careful in using evidence that we know. But if indeed he was killed, was that the ultimate message to dissent inside and outside of the kingdom? Go ahead, Sharmeen.
Well, we know that Mohammed bin Salman does actually think that way, that he is a persona in the Saudi regime that believes in punishing people. And there was this piece written this week by Ben Rhodes, senior advisor to former President Obama. And, he sort of launches into this anecdote where during Obama's last trip in April 2016 to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, they were, American officials were lined up on one side of the room, Saudi officials on the other side, seated, while King Salman and Obama had some words about shared objectives, goals. And then Obama brought up the 47 Saudis who had been executed recently, including the prominent Shia cleric, Nimr al-Nimr. And just completely randomly, Mohammed bin Salman, who's sitting halfway down the Saudi row, and this never happens in these kind of meetings, only the principals engage with each other. He sort of stands up and says, you don't understand. He says this to Obama. He says, you don't understand Saudi justice. The Saudis demand vengeance. Okay, they demand vengeance, and these people need to be killed for the security of Saudi Arabia. So this man is predisposed to this kind of thinking, which is why I really want to underline, I do not think he's going to get away from with this. I'm not saying tomorrow he'll be kicked out, but he has plenty of enemies within the kingdom. He has now, split in effect the U.S. Political establishment that's always been pro-Saudi, because half of them really want to take Trump down with this as well. But, something really important I need to say about Mohammed bin Salman. He's not this young, new generation guy who just popped up on the scene. Mohammed bin Salman is part of a project in the Persian Gulf, and it's a project initiated by Mohammed bin Zayed of Abu Dhabi, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, who wanted basically to bring this guy up the ranks because he knew he could control him. He could get this guy with his simmering rage and their common views on Iran and the Muslim Brotherhood and their right to dominate the region, to sort of set him loose with Saudi money paying for all of it. And as we see in the UAE now, in Yemen now, the UAE is colonizing parts of Yemen, which is, not what the Saudis want. So, they have different agendas, but Mohammed bin Salman was brought in basically up the ranks by Mohammed bin Zayed in Abu Dhabi, and Jared Kushner kind of midwived his ascendance to
that's a really good way of putting it. Let me give Ali the last word on the program. Ali, the Crown Prince, many in Washington say he may be an SOB, but he's our SOB. That's why he will ride it out. 20 seconds. Go ahead, Ali.
Exactly. Just Jane Kirkpatrick said it, and this is the American policy. If he's our friend, he can do whatever he wants. And you can see today the smiles between Saudi MBS and Pompeo of the United States. It just tells you that they are going to continue to support him. They supported King Abdullah before him, who abuses his own daughters, but he's called a reformer, a women rights champion. So this is nothing new. We have heard this before. But I have to say, this is the strongest American reaction to anything that's to do with Saudi Arabia, and I give Trump credit for speaking out. Obama didn't say that. He still continued to stay silent. Same thing as Clinton. They said nothing about this affair.
I have to jump in here. We've run out of time. It's just really...